Good morning, everyone. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Scott Davis, and I'm the project coordinator for Keeping Forest. And I want to thank everybody for taking the time to join us today and learn a little bit more about our work. But before I get into the work itself, I thought it might be useful to back up just a little bit and briefly describe the unique approach that Keeping Forest has taken to forest conservation. Keeping Forest is a broad coalition of public and private partners that has come together to explore strategies around an approach to conservation we refer to as system-level conservation. We're not focused on the conservation of specific tracts of land, but rather on the economic, political, and social drivers that are impacting the entirety of the 245 million acres of privately owned working forest in the Southeast. Collectively, we went through a process known as system mapping, where we looked at those economic, political, and social factors impacting private landowners, and then chose what we thought were three highly leveraged nodes of interaction, where we thought a modest investment might produce an outsized return. Those three nodes included the support of traditional forest products markets, the support and creation of new markets around ecosystem services, and the cultivation and identification of forest champions and leaders. Now, a systems approach to forest conservation isn't a silver bullet, but it's a very, very important piece to the overall picture. And it's a piece that's often overlooked, mostly because it's challenging, cumbersome, and can take quite a long time. However, if we're going to succeed in conserving the 245 million acres of working forest in the South, we have to create the enabling conditions that allow all of us to collectively conserve this important resource. And to do that, we need to change the way people think about forest and their conservation. We need to change the paradigm. So this morning, we'd like to present to you the myriad of projects that are attempting to chip away at that old paradigm and beginning to set the stage for a new way of thinking about forest conservation. It's just a start, but I think it's a good one. Staff and partners will be available for questions and discussion at the end of the morning, so I hope you'll stick around and learn a little bit more about Keeping Forest. Thanks everybody for coming.
Hello, I'm Ken Arney, and I'm the Regional Forester for the USDA Forest Service in the southern region of the Forest Service, and we're headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. As many of you know, along with the U.S. Endowment for Forests and Communities, the Forest Service helped to catalyze the creation of Keeping Forest in late 2015. And we will continue to support this effort as long as our trusted partners see value in this collaborative approach to landscape level conservation. I think given the complexity of conservation challenges faced by the Forest Service and others, the broader conservation community, an effort like Keeping Forest that brings together a wide variety of stakeholders from across the South that are interested in sustainability of our working forest is critical to our long-term success. In many ways, Keeping Forest has been an experiment. We're still learning about how to best influence the social, political, and economic drivers that impact our southern forest. But I'm pleased, and I think you will be too, with some of the foundational work that the partners and work streams have put together during this past year. We're working with private landowners to better understand their concerns around emerging markets for ecosystem services. We're working with the building community to highlight the benefits of using mass timber for construction. And we're developing a host of educational and outreach related materials and activities that hopefully will begin to change the conversation around forest conservation. And I think you're going to be impressed by what's been accomplished this past year. Before we convened the first Keeping Forest meeting in Nashville in 2016, we reached out to stakeholders across the South and asked if a regional effort would be useful. The answer we kept hearing was absolutely, but almost always we heard an afterthought of, but the devil's in the details. And we understood that this was going to be a marathon or maybe even an Ironman triathlon and not a sprint. We continue to build and strengthen relationships and leverage resources across organizations to help us address the challenges at scale. And I know when we had the first meeting in Nashville in 2016, Larry Seltzer, who is the CEO of the Conservation Fund, attended as the keynote speaker. Larry challenged all of us to think about and sell forest as critical natural infrastructure. And I think we've provided leadership and support for our work streams that help do that, as well as continue to build our communications capacity. And the Forest Service will continue to provide resources to support this critical effort. Keeping forests will obviously evolve over time as we learn more about effectively leveraging partnerships to meet our collective conservation goals at the regional scale. As I mentioned, this is an effort that we can't finish in a year or two. This is something that will require a long-term commitment, and we all know that no single organization, including the Forest Service, can meet the South's conservation needs. We've already laid a solid foundation, and I look forward to the continued success of this important effort. Finally, I want to thank all of you as individuals and organizations who have contributed to keeping forests during the past year. In many ways, the collaboration and partnerships are at the very heart of this effort. The partners and all volunteers who are contributing their time, expertise, and resources to help develop and implement keeping forest strategies. Without your help and without your commitment to collaboration, keeping forest would not be the initiative that it is today. So I want all of you to know how much I appreciate your participation and hope that you will continue to participate in our conservation journey to make sure that we have healthy, sustainable forests for today and tomorrow.
Hi, I'm Pete Madden, and I'm the CEO of the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities, headquartered here in Greenville, South Carolina. And although I'm fairly new to the Keeping Forest program, the Endowment has been partnering with the U.S. Forest Service on this program right from the beginning. We at the Endowment are very pleased to join the Forest Service and all of you that are part of the Keeping Forest program. I come from an industry background. I've worked in every timber producing region in the country for companies like Westvaco, Georgia Pacific, Plum Creek Timber, and most recently for a company called Drax Biomass. So I have a deep appreciation and acute understanding for the importance of retaining healthy, well-managed forests to meet the needs for traditional forest products, as well as the many other benefits that the forests provide. Despite their many benefits, we are losing forests to development and fragmentation at a rate that will affect both forest products companies in the future and also society as a whole. Here in the Southeast, although we are blessed to still have very large expanses of forest lands, even these are going to be vulnerable. And I think the Keeping Forest program is a great role model for other regions in the U.S. to look to. Collaborations such as the Keeping Forest play an important role in helping retain our forest lands. And by bringing together agencies, companies, and private partners, the Keeping Forest is facilitating the well-needed dialogue to help the public understand the many values that forests provide and the rationale for retaining healthy, well-managed forests. Since the Keeping Forest program was started, the landscape in which we work in has shifted, and I think for the better. The spotlight now is on forests for their critical role in climate mitigation. The awareness of forests as a natural infrastructure to provide clean, affordable drinking water, and that's growing every day. And also the demand for forests as recreation and health benefits is also skyrocketing. Now more than ever, forests are an important solution to many of the challenges that our society is faced with. And keeping forests can play an important role in creating the conditions necessary for us to retain healthy land. The Keeping Forest focus on private land ownership, I also believe, is spot on. Providing markets and incentives for private landowners is at the core of retaining southern forest lands and educating the public and the decision makers about the importance of active forest management to keep our forests healthy goes hand in hand with private land ownership. It's great to see the Keeping Forest partnership addressing these issues. So I also want to thank all the organizations that have contributed to the Keeping Forest program. And I want to recognize Judy Takats, Rick Cantrell, and Scott Davis for their contributions for Keeping Forest. And we wish you well in your new endeavors. I also want to have a special call out to the Georgia Pacific Corporation and Conservation Resources for your recent financial support of the program. And a special thanks to Ken and the whole Forest Service team for their leadership and their financial support to keeping forests. They are the backbone of this program. So I hope over the next several days, your meetings are fruitful and productive, and I look forward to continuing the conversations. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Kellyn Garrison. I am Senior Campaign Advisor for the Nature Conservancy. And I also co-lead the Champions and Leaders Workstream for Keeping Forests. This has been a lot of fun. This group has grown over the years and we've done a lot of great work. But what you need to know is that our objective in working as a team within Keeping Forests is to change perspectives about forests in the South. We want to talk about the benefits that forests bring to the economy, to communities, and to conservation, and how all of those things come together to enhance the quality of life of those of us that live in the South. So over the years, we've done quite a lot of work together, including a focus on how can we build some communication tools that are based on social science, based on public opinion research that's vetted, third party, and can be a tracking instrument for us over time to see how perceptions are going up or down when thinking about southern forests. So over the last year, we've had quite a bit of work, especially related to target audiences, where we want to start building these messages, building the momentum for working forests, managed forests, those forests in the South that are both doing great, excellent conservation work, and at the same time, building up those communities when it comes to jobs, when it comes to the natural resources and wood products that come out of them, and then of course the whole recreation aspect as well. So the two audiences that we decided to trial all of our work on for the first year, we focused on nonprofit organizations and their leadership and academia. And then we dug a little deeper into academia to target land-grant colleges, of which we have so many important ones here in the South and Southeastern US. So one of the things that we did for targeting these groups to cultivate them as champions, to get them to speak out even more as leaders, was to create a playbook. And I'm going to turn it over now to Brooke Tully, who we hired to help us create this playbook. And she can tell you a little bit more about how we moved from planning and the science aspect of gathering information to this product.
Hey everyone, this is Brooke. Now the intention of this playbook is to create an easy to use resource for our champions and leaders, namely these land-grant colleges and conservation nonprofits, to help communicate the value and importance of our southern forests. Now the Keeping Forests message on paper seems relatively straightforward, right? Let's keep forests as forests. But it can quickly get really complicated as we explore all the things that we want to say about southern forests, and once we recognize that we're up against some existing perceptions about forest-based products and about forest land ownership. And these perceptions really need to get reshaped. Therefore, it's critical for us to have a clear and consistent message across all of our partners that's touching on core key messages to create a unified voice around supporting our southern forests. Now, we worked closely with all 14 members of the Keeping Forests Champion and Leaders team to create this playbook. We started with the first draft that had a ton of messages coming from different angles, different approaches, and touching on all different types of benefits. And we worked over the course of 3 months that included 7 phone calls and 4 iterations to really tighten that playbook to focus on 3 key areas that we wanted to touch upon. And working together, we actually had a great opportunity to pre-test some of these messages with 3 key institutions that would ultimately be using this playbook live in action as champions and leaders. Those institutions we had a chance to test it with was North Carolina State University, Clemson University, and the Forest Landowners Association. Their input when we were at the third draft, before we got to our final iteration, was critical to really refining our playbook so that it was maximum utility for their needs and the content met the type of language and stories they were telling about southern forests. What we ended with was a playbook with 10 core messages, and again on 3 topics. And the 3 topics were increasing awareness of and support for local private forest landowners. This is a group of folks who largely go unnoticed in the public eye in terms of their role and caretaking of these southern forests. The second topic, shifting perceptions of forest-based products towards seeing them as being the most renewable and sustainable option to choose from. And the third topic is highlighting how healthy forests are critical to our own personal health and well-being. These 10 messages can be customized by each champion leader to match their unique brand voice and can be tailored for each of the target audiences that they communicate with, while still creating this unified central voice in support of southern forests. Beyond messages, the playbook includes supporting data points to pull in as needed, outreach ideas to explore various ways that we can get these messages in front of our audiences, and some examples to show what the messages can look like in action. A separate monitoring plan was developed for the Keeping Forest team to assess implementation, performance, results, and outcomes of this playbook, all with the intention of continuing to evolve, refine, and iterate upon this playbook. It also helps us assess how the playbook may need to expand to meet other target audiences in the champions and leaders community. So to date, around 40 leaders representing 13 geographies have received the playbook, and we are excited to see more of these messages roll out and go live. Thank you.
Thanks, Brooke. That was great. So as you just learned, this is really where the rubber meets the road. We have our champions that have the playbook in hand. They're working with their communication messengers and teams within their respected institutions to start trying out some of the messages that we've tested. And we're really looking to work with them in an iterative type of way. We want to learn what's working, what's not, what's resonating, what's not, and how can we be clearer about our message of how important forests are in the southern US. We also want to find out, how can we be more influential? How can we take this message and have that drop in the pond where it ripples outward and more people become champions in and of their own right? So the idea here is that this is an adaptive management experience where we test certain messages and then we see from those speakers, did this message work for you internally within your organization, institution, or business? Or is this more of an external message that you might use? So each time we check in with one of our champions that are using the playbook, we're going to get smarter. We're going to learn what messages work, which ones don't, and how can we get better. And I think that that's really important going forward, because we know that each of us on this team of champions and leaders, we have our audiences, but we need to go bigger. We need to go to scale. And this is just a first step of many to start doing that in a more effective and efficient way. I'd like to turn it over now to Sam Cook, who is a beloved member of the Champions and Leaders team. And I'd like him to share his perspective on what it's been like working on this project.
So yes, I'm here, Sam Cook at NC State, the land-grant university in Raleigh, North Carolina. We are positioned to cultivate additional champions and leaders from other land-grant universities, especially as it relates to the playbook. We want to credibly promote the conservation of sustainable managed forests, as well as motivate others to join in. Also sustain the effort and act. We here at NC State are a think and do motto. To help us meet the goal, we need to create the enabling conditions needed to maintain those 245 million acres of southern forests and their inherent social, economic, and ecological values for the benefit of current and future generations. All land-grant universities are positioned to do this, especially do it with us. Our communications and development team at NC State took the lead by helping to shape the messaging to invite others to join in and join with us. We are well positioned to carry this message and expand it across the land-grant universities.
Thanks, Sam. So maybe you can get a sense of how this rolls up into the other teams within Keeping Forests. We see ourselves as essential. We're communicators, we're building that drumbeat for Southern Forests. And this is exciting moving into 2022. As you heard from Brooke, in addition to creating the playbook, she also helped us create metrics, ways to gauge awareness over time so that we can keep checking in, see how we're doing, see how we need to adapt. We'll also be expanding our target audiences this year, continuing to educate and socialize key stakeholders around the South on the importance of Southern forests. And I'd really like to invite any of you who are interested in this type of work to join us. We have a great team, we have a lot of fun, and as you can see, we have the best partners and consultants that can come to our aid when we work on these exciting projects. So I just want to thank you again and thank all the members of the Champions and Leaders Workstream for going on this journey with us, and best wishes into 2022.
Hello, I'm Owen. I'm the Executive Director with the Southern Group of State Foresters, and I also serve as the Chair for the Forest Markets Workstream. We know from past research in the South that development's the biggest threat to our forests. We also know that if forest landowners can produce revenue from their timberland, they're more likely to keep it as a forest. So to support these forest landowners, we need healthy, resilient forest product markets. So our work stream is trying to advance forest products markets by promoting the use of wood and paper. We're focused, for example, on educating decision makers around the sustainability and versatility of mass timber in public buildings. In addition, we're highlighting paper products as a sustainable alternative to environmentally insensitive products like plastic. By creating forums and providing opportunities for information exchange, we're advancing the knowledge of how forest products can be leveraged as a solution to climate change, and at the same time driving an economic engine that supports nearly 1.3 million jobs across the U.S. South. Now I'm happy to turn it over to a couple of people who can provide perspectives on our work and show its importance to forest land in the U.S. South.
My name is Shan Arora, and I have the honor of serving as the first director of the Kendeda Building for Innovative Sustainable Design at the Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta. Why are we talking so much about this one particular building? It's been the talk of the town for a while now, and that's because it's the first living building in the state of Georgia. So a living building seeks to go beyond sustainability and get to the point where we have a relationship with the planet that's regenerative, meaning we give back more than we take. And so let's talk about what this building is giving back. Over the course of 1 year, this building generates more on-site electricity each year than it consumes. In fact, over 220% net positive energy. Over the course of 1 year, it captures and infiltrates 15 times more rainwater than it consumes. During the construction process, it diverted more waste from the landfill than it sent to the landfill. And there's another way this building is regenerative, in that the day it was complete, it had no carbon impact at all. And we didn't get there just by buying carbon offsets. We got there in large part by incorporating wood. The Living Building Challenge doesn't want buildings to begin their life as being part of the problem. In fact, buildings can be an integral part of the carbon solution. And one of the things that we use is this product that actually stores atmospheric carbon if it's harvested properly. We've seen a lot of wood used in residential construction, but what about commercial construction? So that's what we're showcasing here. We're showcasing mass timber. It's not something that folks necessarily have heard of or understand in our region, and we want this building to be a showcase for mass timber. And we're showcasing two types of mass timber. One is glue laminated mass timber. That's important because it's displacing the need for very carbon-intensive steel and concrete. people get it. The other is nail laminated timber. So that's going to be 2x4s and 2x6s nailed together into, let's just call them plates. Those plates were made off-site. So while this building was under construction, we were actually assembling a very important piece of the building off-site. And those got assembled into panels, and those panels were brought over here, and I watched them go in plop, 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 fast. I think there's another benefit that could come from the incorporation of mass timber into more commercial buildings in the Southeast. You know, we talk about the highest and best use for land. And sometimes I bristle when people say, what's the highest and best use for land? Because it's a very narrow approach. What a sustainably managed tree farm can do is it can provide us ecologic services. It can keep our groundwater clean. It can help dramatically reduce runoff during a heavy rain event. It's cleaning our air. So if we're using more locally sourced mass timber that's displacing imported steel, we are now providing for a truly higher and best use of that land. Because not only is it serving as a carbon sink, not only is it providing ecologic services, it's also enhancing the local economy.
Good afternoon. My name is Yvonne Knight Carter. I own land in Monkscorner, South Carolina, Berkeley County. My sister and I inherited our property around 2008. The property has been in our family for nearly 150 years. My sister and I went through the process of being educated through the Center for Heirs Property so that we would gain knowledge on what to do. Along our journey, we've also, I guess you'd say, accessed another market in terms of sequestration for carbon. We also use our land for leasing for hunting. Some of the challenges that we have faced is finding a good price for the timber, weather conditions. Our main goal in our efforts is, I call it lessons learned, preserving for the future, and that's preserving for future generations so that we're able to keep the land in the family. To save a forest, we must use the forest so that families realize the value that they have for themselves and for generations to come. Finally, no market, no money, no management of the asset, no conservation. Therefore, there's no guarantee that the land will stay in the family without this. In closing, forest markets are important to landowners because it affords us the opportunity to move our timber products, and it incentivizes us to manage the forest.
Okay, I want to shift now and talk more about the impact and focus of our work stream in 2021. First, we partnered with the Southern Group of State Foresters Services Utilization and Marketing Committee, and we developed a list of public building officials and codes and architects and others at the state level to target for mass timber workshops. Secondly, we secured funding from the U.S. Forest Service Forest Products Lab. We developed our agenda, we secured speakers, and we executed our virtual workshop on mass timber. And it was recorded, and it's available on the Keeping Forest website. We had about 100 attendees present, and including our target audience of architects, public building, and code officials. Now, in this workshop, the points we tried to get across to them were why mass timber is a sustainable material, what types of wood buildings are right for their needs, how mass timber can be used for new and retrofitted public buildings, and what architects and contractors needed to know about designing and building with mass timber. We hope this webinar series serves as a resource as we continue our efforts to advance the market for mass timber in the future. Now, Keeping Forest also produced a podcast series titled How the River Flows. And this series highlights the importance of forest to water quality and quantity and opportunities for develop new and emerging markets. You're going to hear more about this podcast later today. But a key part of the discussion about ecosystem service markets like water and carbon is an understanding of how sustainable forest management fits into these models. In 2 episodes of the podcast, we discussed the role that the traditional forest products markets play in providing the basis for forest management, ensuring our forests are healthy, resilient, and productive. Now, these episodes featured Miss Yvonne Knight-Carter, who you heard from earlier today, as well as a host of experts who discuss innovative uses for wood and the potential for advancing markets for mass timber. We're thankful for the opportunity to work on the podcast, and we're very proud of the results. So if you haven't already, you need to go to the Keeping Forest website and check them out. Now I want to introduce my partner in the Workstream, Rick Cantrell. And Rick's going to talk about mass timber research and Ask for Wood.
Thank you, Wib. The Keeping Forest Markets team works to develop strategies to support and catalyze markets for traditional forest products. An emerging and potentially key technology involves the use of cross-laminated timber, or CLT, in the use of commercial building construction, essentially allowing wood to replace more traditional steel and concrete-based designs. The use of CLT in the South, although growing, is limited. We were interested in better understanding the dynamics of this market. We wanted to know if the slow uptake was driven by a lack of demand, or is the lack of demand the result of limited and therefore potentially expensive raw material supply. The Forest to Market study we did, which was sponsored by the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities and the Forest Service, was the first step in a possibly larger, more comprehensive analysis of the potential for CLT manufacture and use in the South. By identifying the potential constraints and opportunities in the supply chain and then working with partners focused on economic development, we could potentially highlight areas of potential investment opportunity. The Forest to Market study found that production by sawmills in the U.S. South was adequate, but demand for the stock needed for CLT production was very high due to the pandemic. The good news is we are seeing increased production by sawmills in the South to meet an ever-increasing demand, as some shuttered sawmills are being reopened and others are adding capacity with new machinery. Now, I would like to talk to you briefly about a new initiative called Ask for Wood, Ask for Paper that Keeping Forest is undertaking. Our markets strategy began to shift early in 2021. It appeared to us that the market was becoming saturated with organizations delivering webinars and meetings on mass timber. As our discussions deepened, we pivoted to a slightly different approach. Our primary approach changed, but our audience remained the same: architects, builders, and public officials. We are now working to create an army of activists within the broader community to promote the use of wood and paper. An older Ask for Wood website, originally created by Clemson University and the Southern Regional Extension Forestry Group, was acquired by Keeping Forest. We are currently doing a quick refresh and rebranding of this website, and we hope to launch it by December 1, and our goal is to do a complete overhaul of the website in Q1 2022. What we want is for forest landowners, forestry consultants, agency foresters, loggers, and all other people in the forestry community to ask for wood and paper in their sphere of influence whenever decisions are being made in construction and paper packaging choices. Is your local community building a new school? Go to the public meetings and ask for wood. When you go to your local grocery store, ask for paper bags. To help support this work, we've developed 2 new flyers to aid this work, and we're planning 6 webinars over the next year targeted at this broader forestry community. We want to give them the information they need to be successful. Our first webinar is now scheduled for December 1 and will focus on mass timber, and it will explain the basics of mass timber, the market potential of mass timber, and showcase options participants can take to promote the use of mass timber and wood in general in their communities and with their political leaders and decision makers.
Well, I want to thank all our speakers today for providing these updates. You know, the setbacks we had during the past pandemic year, and even despite that, I think our Workstream members did a remarkable job in adjusting and producing these results. It wasn't easy, but we figured out how to get together. We didn't finish everything we had hoped to, but we did produce some great results. And I look forward to build on what we've done in the coming year. Now, you've heard from Rick that we're pivoting a little bit in 2022, and we're going to start working on our new Ask for Wood projects, and also Ask for Wood and our Ask for Paper campaign. We're going to talk more about that in the future, and I look forward to giving you information on it as we get there.
Hello, I'm John Mulcahy, Vice President of Sustainability for Georgia Pacific and a member of the Emerging Markets team within Keeping Forests. Forests in the Southeast provide a number of societal benefits, which we refer to as ecosystem services. The ones that we're most familiar with are referred to as provisioning services and include things like timber and game. But they also provide regulating services, including water and carbon sequestration, support services such as soil formation, and cultural services, including spiritual and heritage values. The Emerging Markets team has put together a cross-functional organization that includes forest products companies, federal and state agencies, conservation organizations, and other groups to look to develop markets that compensate landowners for the broad range of services that their land provides. In 2021, we focused on water. There were four main themes to our efforts. First, we wanted to tell our story, which we did through a series of 10 podcasts called How the River Flows, that really talk about the value of forests and markets in our region. Second was to focus on developing some research, which we did through generous grants from both the U.S. Endowment on Forestry and Communities and the U.S. Forest Service to look at the impacts on forest management for water quality and quantity. Third, working with dovetail partners, we studied approaches that help to develop markets for ecosystem services. And finally, we put together a documentary looking at the Savannah River watershed as an example. I'd like to turn it over to Holly Welch, who will provide an example of some of the benefits that were created through our podcasts.
Like John said, I'm Holly Welch, the Environmental Program Manager with the South Carolina Forestry Commission. I was fortunate to host one of the episodes in the podcast series that John just mentioned and that Judy will talk more about in a few minutes. It was an interesting process, and it was fun to do something I'd never done before. As a forester in South Carolina, I regularly have conversations with other natural resource professionals who are concerned about forest land loss across the South. It's difficult for us to see a resource that we know is sustainable and provides countless benefits being replaced by commercial, industrial, and residential development. As you can imagine, most of these conversations are not very uplifting. One of the foresters I've talked with a number of times about these issues called a few weeks after the podcast started to air. He didn't know that I was involved in the process until he heard the episode that I had hosted. He told me that he had listened to several of the episodes and that they had given him hope that all was not lost for forestry in the South. It was great to hear this and all the other feedback that we received from those who listened. Our main goal with this podcast was education, but it seems that a pleasant side effect was encouragement. Judy, what else do you want to share about the podcast?
Thank you, Holly, for sharing that conversation with us. What I really think it demonstrates is the power of stories, which is exactly what we try to do throughout the 10 episodes of our podcast series, How the River Flows. We interviewed 21 entrepreneurs and experts who shared their best ideas on the connection between responsibly managed forests and water. In these episodes, we brought you ideas like how local communities can finance forest stewardship through taxes, bonds, watershed protection fees, as well as how to access state and federal funding. We also talked about how creating robust markets for forest products, the Ask for Wood campaign that you heard about earlier, is a win-win for both water consumers and landowners. And Pete's going to talk to you a little bit more about placing the proper value on ecosystem services and how that supports both local communities and emerging markets. And we had a podcast on that as well. And I was lucky enough to host a podcast on the sometimes tricky interpersonal dance that happens when people try to come together and work on a project. And these topics and several more propelled us into a global top 80 podcast with listeners tuning in from around the world. It even became the most visited part of our website. And these stories could not have been possible without all of our guests. So if you're tuning in, thank you so much to all of you. And I want to give a special thank you to our hosts, Carlton, Kevin, Leslie, Robert, Andreas, Leo, Holly, John, and Sam. Thank you so much. A couple more thanks. One goes out to the USDA Forest Service and the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities for supporting How the River Flows. Chuck Lavelle, thank you so much for the music. And I want to send out one final thank you to Lee Schneider, our podcast producer. We could not have done this without you. I'm so proud to have served as executive producer for How the River Flows, and I'd like to invite you to tune in to the series wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Judy Takats with Keeping Forest, and Pete, I'd like to turn it over to you to talk to us a little bit more about ecosystem services.
Thanks, Judy. Again, I'm Peter Caldwell. I'm a research hydrologist with the Forest Service Southern Research Station. A big part of my work has included linking forests to water supplies across the South and beyond. I was introduced to the Keeping Forest Ecosystem Services team back in 2019 when Scott Davis and others on the team reached out to discuss ways that we might be able to link forests to water-related ecosystem services in the South. In later discussions, we developed an idea that would quantify the benefit of forests for water quality across the South and would assess the economic value of those services for downstream water supplies. Through this partnership with the Ecosystem Services team and the leadership of the Georgia and South Carolina Forestry Commissions and the Forest Service Southern Region, we were awarded a Southern Group of State Foresters landscape scale restoration grant to do this work. The plan was to use water quality monitoring data and hydrologic models to quantify the linkage between forest and water quality broadly across the South and in fine detail in case study watersheds, including the Savannah River Basin in Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina, the Middle Chattahoochee River Basin in Georgia and Alabama, and the San Jacinto watershed in Texas. We then proposed to quantify the raw water quality at public water systems across the South and connect that information to their treatment cost structure at those facilities so we could estimate the economic value of upstream forests for downstream water supplies. Lastly, we proposed to serve all this information up in a public-facing website. Work began on this project in November of 2020 as we met with the Keeping Forest Ecosystem Services team to define the scope of the project. Since then, we pulled together a research team including hydrologists and economists from NC State University, Texas A&M, the Forest Service Southern Research Station, and the Rocky Mountain Research Station. Much of our efforts so far have been in pulling together data sets and developing our hydrologic models and water utility surveys. We expect 2022 to be a very productive year as we transition into running land use scenarios and putting together publications and presentations of our work. Ultimately, our goal is to provide data and the proof of concept that could inform payment for ecosystem services for private forest landowners to help compensate them for the ecosystem services they provide. So stay tuned for more results next year. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Andres Villegas, the President and CEO of the Georgia Forestry Association and the Georgia Forestry Foundation. I'm here with Robert Ferris, our Director of Ecosystem Services. For the past several years, we've been thinking really hard about how we can add value to Georgia's timberland assets. In particular, focusing on the economic and environmental sustainability of our timberland owners. One of the things that we focused in on is water resources as new markets that can potentially generate new revenue, sustaining and the economic principles that allow landowners to own their timberland. Over the past few years, we started working on identifying watersheds, identifying partners, and more importantly, identifying ways that we can start generating trust to create a marketplace between landowners and water utilities that will generate opportunities for the future. To that end, we embarked with support from Keeping Forest and the U.S. Endowment to start looking at research that could help us identify the different mechanisms by which landowners can engage in transactions. That work led to work that was done by Dovetail Partners that was led and managed by Robert Ferris. Robert, will you tell us a little bit about that?
Hello and happy holidays. One of the projects we worked with Keeping Forest on this past year in conjunction with the U.S. Endowment was looking at a suite of different legal options and opportunities for developing payment for ecosystem service markets related to forest water. We worked with a think tank of forestry, Dovetail Partners, in looking at this project, and we had several objectives. As I mentioned, defining those options, looking worldwide at systems and market systems that have worked. Also, a task that we had was to develop forums and host forums across the state, which were well attended by over 300 landowners and water professionals, and those forums were sponsored by the Georgia Pacific Corporation. And then lastly, we came up with development of recommendations on how to develop those programs and to have long-term engagement, sustained engagement with landowners and water professionals in the development of those programs. Interestingly, in the forums, the top landowner concerns were dealing with the government, overcomplicated agreements, and unwarranted restrictions on harvester land use. And the water professionals' top concern in this was defining and letting their stakeholders know of the value of forest to water quality. And this segues very well into work that the Keeping Forest organization already has underway and is planning in the future, and that is looking at the specific values on specific watersheds and basins that those forests provide to water users. With that, you'll hear more about that project coming up soon here. So if you're interested in additional details on the findings of this work and report, which is really applicable across the Southeast, visit the Keeping Forest website.
One of the most important things that we learned in this effort was really the pivotal need for partnerships. Everywhere we looked, and the Dovetail report looked around the country, partnerships were really central to making these kind of mechanisms and these marketplaces work. We are so thankful for the partnership we have with Keeping Forest, U.S. Forest Service, U.S. Endowment, and so many others to make this work happen. At the end of the day, good research and good projects usually lead to new opportunities, and that's what we've seen here. Our team started working on, with support from Keeping Forest, a documentary that found and identified and talked about a success story that we had here right in our own backyard. The Savannah River has been an area where these types of projects have been going on for a few years now. There are some market transactions that have taken place there to reward landowners for the good work that they're doing, stewarding the water that's going into the Savannah River Basin. And with that, we've created this documentary to make sure that other people can learn and know about that success story, as well as the work that's left to be done. This is an evolutionary process. It's going to take a long time for us to be able to be successful in this space. And so what's very important for us is that the partnerships are strong, so that we can be persistent and consistent in our effort to make sure that we're developing the trust that's needed to make these transactions happen, and also make sure that we're bringing all of the right players to the table in these types of systems. You know, one of the things that we'll see at the end of the day when we're successful with this is that this will be a landscape change across a large geography, across an entire watershed, across multiple watersheds in the southeastern United States. We should start seeing effective market transactions, helping us ensure that our forests stay intact and that the water that comes from those forests, that in Georgia at least 6.5 million people need for their use every single day, is still there when they turn on their faucets every day.
And to add to your partnerships comment, Andres, working on this Forest and Water Connection project with Keeping Forest this year, we incorporated and engaged a lot of partners here in Georgia, including the Georgia Forestry Commission, the Warnell School of Forest Resources, the Georgia Tree Farm System, the Georgia Sustainable Forestry Initiative System, Southeastern Partnership for Forest and Water. So a lot of groups have plugged into this project and been great partners with us. And might also add that we focused on 4 specific water basins based on a pretty wide variable matrix of variables to select those water basins. And I think they're pretty representative of a lot of water basins across the Southeast. So the findings and output from this project can really be applied across the Southeast.
That's right, and that's one of the most important things for us is the scalability of these things. It's great when they work in one watershed. It's even better when they work across an entire region, and especially a region like the South, where we're adding so many new residents every year. And so I think for us that kind of presents an opportunity. It also presents urgency. And I think on the opportunity side, while we have some great partners in place today, there's probably room for several more that need to come to the table over time. But it's going to be this core group of folks that we have supporting us from that are the ones that are closest to the resources and have the most at stake in the success. That'll be the ones that'll ultimately carry us through from the beginning to the end. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your attention, and we look forward to the future.
All right, thanks everyone. Next year, we will be advancing the work that Pete mentioned, sharing more broadly the film Andres discussed, and implementing the findings of the Landowner Survey. So what can you do to help? Go to our website, sign up for our newsletter, listen to our podcasts. If you would like to join the Workstream, please email info@keepingforests.org. Thank you very much.
There are really 2 aspects to the communications with Keeping Forest. One is the development of a communications plan, which I think will help sort of bring our branding work and some of the previous research work into focus and sort of uplift and make better known Keeping Forest, help people to understand who we are, what it is, and what we do. But the other piece involves the work streams. The plan doesn't directly deal with the work streams and their communications challenges. However, a focus on communications and pulling our new communications capacity into the project, I think will help our work streams talk about what they do, help them to focus on the audiences that they need to be focused on, and will help them to move their projects forward. This year, thanks to the generosity of the U.S. Forest Service and the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities, we were able to hire a communications contractor, a professional communications person that also has a forestry background. Jen Howard of Stewart Terra came to Keeping Forest and has helped us to put together a comprehensive communications plan that will help us solve some of our internal communications challenges as well as our external challenges. So the communication plan that Jen put together for us helps us to deal with our internal communication challenges, and that is really helping us to understand how to communicate, how to connect, how to work with all of the partners that are spread across this coalition. Externally, we have to get much better at helping the world to understand who we are, and what we do. And finally, there's a third piece that really wasn't addressed specifically by the plan, but is sort of a happy coincidence. And that is the focus on this plan and this new capacity to implement the plan is helping our work streams meet some of their strategic goals. Each of our work streams has, frankly, a specific audience that they're trying to move. The traditional forest products folks are trying to get architects and builders and the people that write codes, etc., to think more about using mass timber in the construction of commercial buildings. The folks working on the ecosystem services side are trying to get municipalities and water managers to think a little bit more about how functional forests protect and sustain their water supplies. And the folks on the champions and leaders side are working with nonprofits and educators to help them refine their messaging so that we can get out a coherent vision of what our forests might look like if we take care of them over the long run. And this plan will help us to do that, not directly, but by bringing additional capacity to the fore and helping people understand the importance of communication to all of this work.
Hi, I'm Jen Howard with Stewart Terra Communications in Summerville, South Carolina. I was honored to be invited to develop a communication strategy for keeping forests that amplifies the work of the organization by leveraging the strong branding effort that you invested in over the last 2 years. In short, my goal is to help you achieve your organization's objectives by dialing in to 3 key things: what we need to achieve, who are the people with whom we need to connect to reach those goals, and how best do we reach them and motivate them to take action. My recommendations are summarized in a communications plan that was completed earlier this fall and transitioned to your team for continued input and implementation. It's easy to look outward to forest products companies, landowners, consumers. Those are all great audiences, but our first step is to make sure that our internal house is in order. Are our executive committee, core team, Workstream leads, and volunteers empowered to advocate on our behalf? To answer this question, I interviewed individuals who had shaped keeping forests from the beginning and those who have just joined and are at the very beginning of their journey. Those interviews provided the foundation of my internal communications recommendations that can be boiled down into 3 buckets: cross-pollination, onboarding, and relationship building. Those of you who are already involved in keeping forests will soon start to see improvements in how we communicate with and through you, how we prepare new team members for their volunteer roles, and how we connect you to each other and others who are passionate about this work. External communications can be a little bit more challenging. It's a big, noisy world out there, and we want to be heard. The details outlined in this communications plan build upon the findings from the branding work by leveraging those key messages and audiences and recommending specific tactics. We will be speaking to and through those who are economically invested, landowners and consumers, through aggressive social media campaigns on 4 major platforms. And we will be intentionally leveraging partners in media to support our awareness of the organization and weigh in on issues that are aligned with our Workstream efforts. All of this will be wrapped up with ongoing monitoring of our progress and refining the plan. So it's time to get your running shoes on and let's get started.
Thanks, Jen. I'm excited to have both the plan and the capacity to implement the plan as we move forward into 2022. I think keeping forest is going to take on sort of a whole new kind of look and feel as we move into the next phase of our work. Thanks again. Before I go any further, though, I'd like to thank our primary sponsors, the U.S. Forest Service and the U.S. Endowment for Foresting Communities, and the 40-plus partners that have made this whole project possible. Across the 3 work streams, our partners are working on a variety of projects that are moving forest conservation at scale forward. Our strength lies in the diversity of organizations that make up our coalition. And to succeed, we need your help. If you like what you heard today, there are 3 ways that you can get involved. Stay up to speed with what we're doing, join an email list, follow us on social media, or become a member and join one of the work streams. So thanks everyone for taking the time today to learn a little bit more about keeping forest. It's an important project that matters to future generations. So please think about engaging, think about helping us, and we hope to hear from you soon.